everybody. I'm Shadley Gray with AMI. For those of you who don't know me, I have been in and around the AMI community for several years. I've known Drew for a long time. I officially joined AMI at the end of last year. I'm working in partnerships and business development. We're very excited to um, be kicking off this webinar series. And I'm excited to have Pam Slim with us today. For those of you who may not know, I'll just say a little bit about AMI and Agency Management Institute. It is a organization that is dedicated to helping small to mid-sized marketing companies level up. And this webinar series is intended to bring some more actionable insights and advice to people that are looking for ways to expand and build their agencies. Um, Pam Slim is fantastic. We became buddies last year at a couple conferences. She's an award-winning author. I'm sorry, I'm reading your bio, but she's an award-winning author, advisor, and agency owner who has spent 3 decades helping business owners scale their business and IP. The Pamela Slim Agency specializes in productizing service businesses and the design and development of certification and license programs. Pam is the author of Escape from Cubicle Nation, Body of Work, The Wildest Net in 2021, which was the winner of the Best Sales and Marketing Book of 2021 from Porchlight Books.
I love it. It's the widest net, but I kind of like the wildest net better.
Oh, did I say wildest? Apparently I need to check my
I
glasses
d-
for the
but it could
widest.
be both, depending on
Yeah.
your net.
And knowing you, wild seems kind of appropriate.
That's
So,
right.
um, yeah. So I am going to turn things over to Pam, or this will actually be more of a conversation than a lecture. So, but I will turn things over to Pam and we'll get started.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Hadley. Yeah, it was so fun. We met and we strolled the streets of Cleveland, meeting at a conference. It's one of my favorite things. I'm not sure if I met any of you at AMI as well. I was at the conference last year, so if we did meet, it's good to see you again. And I am excited about this topic because it's pretty much what I live and breathe every day, really thinking about for each of you as agency owners and people who both use your own knowledge and wisdom to be able to help your clients come up with creative ways to market their business, but also really help your clients to get their products and services out in the world. And so, what I want to be talking about today is twofold. I'll go ahead and start to share my screen, which is ways that you can think about the process of productizing services, of scaling IP. On one hand, of course, from a product perspective. So it's how you can think about ways to leverage what you know, insight, uh, systems, methodologies to actually package and sell to your clients. And the other way is where you can be thinking about a lot of the principles that we'll talk about today is also ways just to run your agencies more efficiently and effectively. Because to me, those are two sides of the same coin. I am someone who loves interaction and insight, and I know Shadley and I often we initially were introduced and came together because we both really work a lot with people who want to be sharing their ideas in things like IP and licensing materials, but also in things like books. And so, Shadley, I invite you to be jumping in as I'm talking, as we're exploring some ideas. And for those of you that are here, where you have questions as you go, Shadley, you can maybe be monitoring chat so we could
I
jump
am.
in. And I really think the best way for us to often bring to light some of these ideas that I'll share with in the methodology is by looking at the kind of things maybe that you're working on right now to do a little of real time input. So Let me start by introducing the framework. Sharon Turek and I talked about this at AMI, if you know Sharon from Legal and Creative. And it really is thinking about the where you have this particular focus to be structuring more of an IP, intellectual property based business, where you are looking to productize your services and then really begin to leverage and create products around your ideas. There are four general phases that you think about. And so the first is just in clarification. Generally, this is where you are maybe leaning into certain areas where you may realize that you have a unique competitive advantage, that you have more methodology. I use the metaphor of magic a lot, where when you think about it, you can have amazing people, including yourselves, in your agency that can show up with a client and just have magic happen. You get in a room, you're thinking about ideas. Each of you might be pulling ideas from your head. You're contributing to ideas for campaigns or whatever it is that you're working on. But it's often in this stage where a lot of your approach and your methodology just lives in your head. And so on one hand, it can be exciting where you do have that experience with clients where you can just be creating things together. Over time, it can also become exhausting because if you don't have methods or frameworks and ways that you work, you're always relying upon you being perfectly caffeinated, having all the right ideas. And also, when I think about it from a consistency basis, as you're really looking to be delivering consistent things to your clients, that you might miss certain parts of the ingredient about what makes your magic special, especially for those of you that are moving maybe from being a smaller agency to bringing more people in. And so that's where we want to go through the phase of codification, where essentially people other than you, if you're the founder, can use your magic. And then eventually it's where your clients who may be excited about the work that you're doing as an agency can also begin to use your magic if you have some of your methods that they could be using within their own business that wouldn't even require you and your staff to be doing that work directly. But this phase of codification is really important, which I'll talk about specifically in a minute, so that all of that magic gets out of your head and it gets documented in the form of often words, things like a book, which to me is always a beautiful way to be bringing an overall approach to life is by codifying it. It can also be in models and different elements of a method. From there, if you really are looking to scale and to have things like certification programs, then you need to do the work of really educating people in the market, educating the market about the method. So it's less about we have amazing people who work with us, which is very true. The fact that you may be amazing and that people love to work with you, but really elevating from a messaging perspective how you have this particular method that is something that people are going to want to bring into their business. Because when given the choice, people will often initially just want to work with a founder, whoever is the creator, of a particular method. Once it really becomes codified and working well within the agency, then they can come to trust to know that anybody that I work with in the agency is likely to be giving me consistent, amazing results because they have a strong method. For people to go that next step to think about how might I be bringing that method into my own business through something like a certification or a licensing process is where you really have to do educating about it. So that I think is sometimes a missing step. A certification and licensing is definitely more of a mature model of business, but so much of our time, understandably, as agency owners is going towards just educating people about hiring us to do work. And so I just encourage you when you're thinking about that to be centering the message about the method that you use so that people are aware of that in addition to how great you are to work with. So these are the different kind of stages that you go through when you are looking to scale that also mean that you need to have the operations that support that in your business. We at the agency talk about your thumbprint. So you think about the overall body of work that you have, that you create with your agency. for each of you, and I am curious, and if you wouldn't mind throwing in the chat, if you already know and identify, are there any core things that you have? So an approach to doing what you're doing, your specific niche area within your agency, is there anything that's really known as a core method, something that's really unique to your approach? Do you have it, do any of you have it codified? Do you have it protected or trademarked? Generally, you can think about your thumbprint as this core method that needs to meet three criteria that we'll talk about, that becomes something that you can really begin to build an overall process around. One popular one that we've heard a lot about, through the years, story brand. When you look at Donald Miller's way that he's taken a particular method and approach to how it is that you codify, how it is that you're telling a story and doing presentations. There really is that approach to making sure on one hand that there's a market fit, aka will it sell? Are you packaging things in such a way that people, you're meeting a need in the market, you're communicating them in a way that they really understand and appreciate what you are selling, they get excited to buy it. There's the method, will it work? Is the method that you're using something that actually works? Because we've probably often seen or maybe invested in things that sounded amazing. They sounded like they were going to solve all of our programs, whether it was that $2,000 course that just you take it and all of a sudden all your problems will be solved, or maybe where you were investing in a coaching program or something like that. What you always want to make sure you have in alignment is that what you are promising to sell, you can actually deliver in the method, and that the methodology you have is one that has rigor, that it really works consistently, and that is something that people can rely on. And then the final piece is your model, will it stick? Which is describing what it is that you offer in such a way that it makes easy for people to remember it so that they're likely to do it more. So every time somebody's getting ready to deliver a keynote, they might go back to the story brand method. There's sticky parts of it that are easy to remember. And it also becomes something that is easy to pass on to other people. So it makes people who are enthusiastic about your particular method excited to be sharing with others. Shadley, did we have any examples in the chat of people who have codified methods?
Do not.
Nobody so far? Okay, well, that's all good because there's no place to start like the present. So I think the place to look as you understand it first, what are you really looking for in terms of how you can start to pull out this codification of the method that you have in such a way that you can be sharing it with others, training others in it, and explaining it, is looking at these core parts of the thumbprint. In terms of finding the particular market fit, the
If
market.
I could interrupt you just for a
Yeah,
second,
yeah.
we just have
Okay.
Lori jumped in to say that we've got our research process that leads to developing a strategy.
I love it. Okay, thanks for sharing that, Lori. So yeah, that's a great example where if there's a specific way that you might approach it, maybe there are core methods that you have, maybe there are questions that you're asking that not everybody is asking. When you lean in for that particular method, that could be something that would be useful for other agencies to use over time. Maybe you have a superior way that you're doing the research. Maybe you can do it quicker than other people. Maybe it's more thorough. Maybe there are more direct links that you have to how that research tends to lead to a better strategy that leads to better, more consistent outcomes. But that's exactly the part I think that you can start to lean in and notice. To me, what I always look for or listen to more accurately are the things that my clients are constantly asking me. They're like, God, it would be amazing if I just had this, if I could just, what it is for most of my clients, it's a content calendar. How many times have all of us probably developed content calendars and shared them with people? But it just seems to be something in all my decades of work with entrepreneurs that to this day, everybody just seems to be confused about. How do I decide exactly what I should talk about, to whom during the year, and what are the themes? Those are examples of things that you can hear from clients. Or, I just want to know 100% that my strategy is going to work. and not to have to worry about investing a bunch of money for with an agency and then not getting the results that I need and increase revenues. That's where Lori would be jumping in to say, we got you, here's the way that we help you to get to your particular outcome by our very specific research process. And we found that it leads to, 50% better returns over time, or whatever that thing is. Um, the other
Well,
things,
you also added, she added that everyone overthinks their content calendar, which
right?
underlines what you were just saying. So yeah.
I know, I know. And so, I mean, that's just, it's always something. And it sounds so basic to almost be insulting, but I tell you, for every entrepreneur I know, that just is a thing. There's probably some sort of AI tool now these days that we could develop where maybe you're, entering in certain kinds of key content, as marketing professionals, that there are things that need to happen in advance. The inputs that would go into a content calendar are very critical. But it just is an example to me of looking for sticky things that we know everybody would really need, where you find these points that would provide a lot of relief to people, that they would get excited if there was just this one thing that they could use. And it's not only your end user clients that you're working with in your agency, it also can be fellow agency owners where they're like, yeah, that is a pain in the ass, for everybody. If you have one, I would love to license it and just use it in my practice because that means that I wouldn't have to build it. So these are the kinds of things that you can start to pay attention to. Shadley, I'm curious for you and the work you do with people wanting to write books. Like, what are some of these? What are the things that pop up when they're talking to you about like wanting to write a book but not being able to?
I think a lot of it is, or the big thing that comes up is like concept management. Like how much of this a, do I have enough for a book is one thing. Like, do I have enough content that actually fills a book, or is it a ebook or is it an article? Do I have enough? And is it focused enough that it fills a book instead of several ideas? Like, do I have a through line that feels like I am offering something new that would have a framework around it, or it would feel like it's not just a series of stories, it's a story throughout the entire thing.
I
Uh,
love that.
so I think that kind of, and then I think actually just the process of writing is trying to find the the time management and how do I carve out time and how do I break it up, and so it's you're not sitting down to write a book, you're sitting down to write an outline, or you're sitting down to write um 10 things. I'm not writing 10 chapters. So, like the breaking down the scope of the goal to something that feels more manageable is those are the things.
Yeah.
Clarifying the story or clarifying the why and the
Mm,
what of the book,
yeah.
and the actual hands-on time management of as an agency owner, how do I now dedicate time to writing a book?
I love that. Well, and then I mean that could be an example, and people could say it'd be amazing if I could have a way that I could sort through ideas to make sure that there is a book here, and then there could be a process where I just figure out exactly how it is I'm going to chunk the work up to get it done, because that is for a lot of people. I've always dreamed of sometime writing a book where I didn't have to run a full-on practice, but it hasn't happened so far, 3 books in. So I've always had to fit the writing and the research and everything in with everything else that I'm doing. And so it's an example for each of you as you're listening, the places, if you're interested in beginning to experiment with some of these productized services or licensable parts of your IP, look for the places. Maybe you deliver an overall strategy, or maybe you deliver an overall plan, including all kinds of like a toolkit and different implementation pieces. Pay attention to the things that just light people up, where they're like, oh my gosh, this one thing is so amazing. Because it doesn't have to be a huge method. In fact, bigger methodologies are often harder at first to really be selling to people because they can feel overwhelming. often the parts that we want to start to look at are some of these smaller systems or methods that just help people to get their work done faster. So this is a really important part of just finding what could be the potential ideas of the kinds of things that you can monetize. And then when it comes into the method itself, these are the kinds of checkpoints that you want to look for, because in order to make sure that something actually works, you want to look at, what's already been tried that really has traction and has high satisfaction. Are there others in, the industry that might follow similar best practices? This is where, when you're thinking about just the efficacy of your method, that it has consistent outcomes, that it's built on a solid foundation. We've all had those amazing ideas in the shower, that hit us for ideas for, the kind of method. The thing that you're looking for to really have something that is repeatable and scalable is where that consistently when you're applying it, you tend to get the consistent outcomes. And you can really backtrack and you can say, this is why in the construction of the methodology that the pieces really fit together. So this is something that's really important, so that you can feel good. To me, it's always really, really important that our clients feel at the end of working with us that they absolutely received what was promised, and that they went through a process that was based on, many years of development, and that they can feel really solid with the outcomes. The other thing is just what can be repeatable and scalable. So in order for something to be scalable, you want to make sure that you've really documented the steps. Usually that first pass of what you do is, and Lori's the example of probably that's what, she and her agency have done, is to go through and at first document every part of what that research system is. Then you want to look at, is there any way that you could be removing steps, automating certain pieces, have technology that supports you to increase demand. And then also, as you think about if you have maybe a service that you can have more as a productized service as you're getting ready to do more scaling, is it something that can scale without significantly impacting operations? This is really more where you're building the efficiency in what it is that you're doing. And over time, it could be something that you could then be sharing with other people. But this part is really important to make sure that you get all the steps in the right order. And then I think especially with AI these days, there are a lot of things, and with automation and zaps and things like that, you can remove the human component. I mean, I love humans. We always want to have humans in our agencies. But really, when I look at the ways to be using AI and automation effectively, it's to do the things that nobody really wants to do, that are just the steps that make more sense to be using with automation. And then finally, it's really where you're wanting to make things understandable and trainable. So is it, clear, simple language that a broad audience can understand? Do you have, training materials to be teaching the methodology? Have you tested it with a pilot group to make sure it's easy to understand and implement? This is often a process where you go through a couple of different iterations to make sure that just the language is clear and accessible for people. But these are the ways to make sure that what it is that you're sharing is something that, again, is embedding the magic of what it is that you do into the methodology, and so that you capture all the steps. We find often that there are parts of what you do that you may not even realize are really special, because if you're the one who's delivering it or your immediate team, you may not pay attention to the things that are actually critical to the process. So sometimes it's helpful to have somebody else from the outside ask you questions about it, or partner with you to be documenting things to make sure that you get all of it. So that's really in that market fit side. Then you go through your codification for the method. When we look at some of the later stages for certification, this is just an example of visualization about the way in which you can start to package your IP so that you have the materials you need in order for that to scale. And I'll give you an example of some folks who have those kind of certification programs. But you can see where this takes codification to the next level. So this is an example we call it a level 3, which is a trainer certification. So let's say we wanted to train Shadley, you ended up wanting to have a whole cadre of people who were helping agency owners write books as demand increases. And so you could develop a core methodology. Maybe you would have a core workshop everybody would go through first, and then there would be a number of tools and methods that you would use. This is an example of the codification that you can have in a certification program so that everybody would have the consistent materials needed in order to scale. So this is where, as I always say, the certification licensing is often a much more mature business strategy. It requires a lot of effort and energy in order to be putting these things in place. And you can see walking back how doing the work initially to be choosing the right kind of methodology, going through rigor as to how you're creating that method, and then testing it and making sure that it works, then eventually putting it into more of a structured program is part of what it allows it to scale. I spend a lot of my time often telling people to maybe not start too soon to be doing things like certification if they haven't tested first the other steps that are needed. All right, a couple of notes about codifying, just what are the key things to think about for those of you who just think, nobody could ever do it the way that we do it. It could very well be true. However, one of the ways that you could maybe start to pull out your method is just having other people's observe, transcribe, pull out your method. One thing we're doing at the agency is we use Fathom. I notice a number of you have I call them your chief of staff, right? I have like my Fathom friend that accompanies me into all meetings. So you could go through maybe the last, 10 or 12 meetings or engagements if you do use something like Fathom or Otter, like I see some of you using. And you can pull out and notice. You can ask it, give it different prompts, and ask it to notice maybe the consistent questions that you're asking, what's the order in which you're asking things. And that's a very efficient way sometimes of pulling out and recognizing what are core parts of your methodology. I think it's really changed the game a lot to be using using AI that way. And what I notice is in doing that, there are a lot of things that might happen in typical conversations that we have with clients and kickoffs and deeper discussions working with them that I wouldn't notice had I not aggregated a number of different similar calls and then run some of the IP prompts through it. If you feel like you have a bunch of ideas that you want to test and it feels overwhelming, that is where I recommend you can pull out and you could prioritize maybe one thing at a time. Is there anything that you could start with that might be a little bit smaller that you could begin to go through that codification process? And then sometimes you have this, we call it the curse of the creative founder, where it's like you may not think in a structured way. You might have sweat a little bit when you saw my certification slide with all of that structure around all the different components. Some of you, that may not be your nature. And so either you could leverage your operational staff, or that's often where we step in to be helping. If your strength is really in the genius that you bring to work, but it's not necessarily in operationalizing it, because you really do need to have that mind and process that helps to pull the ideas out and organize them in a way for other people to see. So just some of the different ideas. These were some of the things for those of you that were at BABA that Sharon and I were talking about. Creative ways to think about a market fit. Like where could you be selling these things to other people? For other marketing agencies, there can be things that you do that are what I call a PB&J relationship. They are highly complementary but not competitive. So maybe there's something about a method that you have that would be really complementary, and then you could create licensing of your tools or your process to others. For corporate clients, you could be doing strategy for folks, and you might find that there are certain of the tools especially for implementation, maybe marketing tools, that famed content calendar, whatever the things are, maybe consistent training that you could do. For staff, you could have an approach in which the larger companies, if they're bringing on people into the marketing department, you could give them an overview to what your process is. These are ways that you could you could have a little bit more reach. There can be nonprofits where there could be consistent ways you could have toolkits to help them do better fundraising or things like that. I'm finding a lot of our clients these days are getting opportunities for international clients where they might get excited about a methodology that's broad based in the US or Canada. Uh, and there are people in country who want to be, let's say, the sole license provider of a method. So this is true for some of our like leadership agency folks that are teaching about, leadership toolkits where people love the methodology and they don't want to recreate it. They want to be more of a licensed partner. So that could be an approach to global markets. And then for service professionals, there are certifications that you could do for, I think a lot as a longtime business coach, I I feel like I like backed into marketing by doing marketing advising and learning about it for so many years of working with people in general on their business models. But I never pretend to be a seasoned marketing professional like all of you are. I always love to be learning more things and maybe to be certified in new tools that will make me better and stronger in my profession. So there can be other service professionals who could benefit from your approach. And I, all the time, when I see somebody who has a really good approach, either want to learn myself, have somebody on my staff that gets certified in somebody else's method, or to be licensing certain materials or having a partnership where I can be referring to somebody else's work. Because I don't personally feel like we have to be creating every single offering or every single method within our business. I definitely like to work in more of a partner model. And then in verticals, there can be very specific vertical markets, areas where you could have a particular approach or methodology that maybe would be a great fit for people in the project management professions or for people, within financial services. And maybe there's a really dialed in approach that you have that would help people in that vertical to market their business more effectively. So it really depends. To me, this always is going to back into how you see your markets. Are there places where what it is that you're doing with your existing market today could be leveraged by other people? And just never discounting the fact that people who have a highly complementary service offering could often be great partners to introduce you to new clients and to potentially be introducing you to licensing the work. All right, so here's just a couple examples before we can open it up for some Q&A. So our client, Strong Brand Social, they have a very specific approach to how it is that they do social media marketing. They often work with agencies who often will be selling social, into their overall marketing strategy, but they really prefer to have more of this license model because they have developed a very rigorous methodology. So their certification licensing partners, they have an F the algorithm. Of course, they're a little cheeky, you can see right in their approach to their brand, but they have a specific certification for their approach to social that is for individual service providers like me as a business coach, where people can use their methodology and tools with their own clients. They also have a market, which are agencies who want to be leveraging their approach to how they're doing social inside their agency. And so that's been a way that they've really centered in on what they call the S3 system, which is a very specific approach to building social content that's very connected with their clients' business objectives and business goals. Sparketype, another client, Jonathan Fields. Some of you might know Jonathan from the Good Life Project or the Good Life Podcast. This is an example that I think that leverages assessments. I'm a huge fan of assessments. They can be a great, like lighter assessments can be great lead generation, but then you can have deeper assessments that both give more detailed information to your clients or maybe help to guide them and give them advice in certain areas where they can benefit from your work. So what I like about Jonathan's work as an example of a very end-to-end, very thumbprint-esque, if you will, The market fit is really clear. There's good messaging, there's good reinforcement. The methodology really has worked. And then the model is really sticky, where he actually started with a Sparketype assessment. So this is an assessment you can take for free. He ended up, I think, getting over maybe it was 400,000 or 500,000 responses, something like that, which then helped him to sell the book, which was Sparked. That really describes more the overall methodology about Sparketype. Sparketype is a way you can understand how you're wired at work, kind of your unique sparks and your unique approach. So he leveraged the assessment to get the book deal. He has a podcast on LinkedIn that's in partnership with LinkedIn called Sparked, which helps to be supporting book sales as well as more people taking the assessment. And then he has the certified Sparketype advisor training, which is for people who are using this tool with their clients. So I work with Jonathan in the early days to be developing the first prototype of that program, which then they have continued to develop over time and have more of a virtual leveraged model. So that is another example, which I really like from the market fit side. From a just unique approach to packaging IP, Parshell Tashi is from the Author's Leverage. She's one of our partners, and she has developed these really cool digital workbooks. We're Notion fans. Anybody Notion fans? You can tell me in the you can tell me in the comments. But I love Notion. Our whole business portal is all built in Notion. She's developed this specific approach to building digital workbooks. So initially, she does a lot of work with authors. She was building online courses that would be going with a book. And now she has a digital workbook, which is a specific hands-on kind of an online tool that can have videos embedded. It has worksheets where people can, copy over. For those of you familiar with Notion, you could copy over this workbook into your own portal, and therefore you could begin to do the work right there live in the digital workbook, but you could still have access to educational materials, videos, things like that. It's just a really beautiful, just beautifully designed work. And thinking back to what I talked about in Market Fit, when I first saw her work, because she was showing me, we were talking about work we do that's highly complementary. And when she first showed me, I was like, oh my God, like that is so beautifully designed. It was one of those like craft person to craft person where you just recognize the game of somebody who does something really well. So then I invited her to talk with my whole team, who are all instructional design nerds, and everybody had the same reaction. It was just like this silence because everybody was in awe of what she was building. That to me is where you know that you have this beautiful gold in something that becomes easier to scale. So the way we work it in the case with her is really more from a partnership perspective. If our clients want something, maybe pre-certification, they want to have a digital workbook that they start to scale before they build a certification, we partner with Parshell in order to build them. And it's just a really great relationship. Some of you might know Carly, who has been a longtime AMI friend. She's one of my old-time clients. And I wrote about her in The Widest Net. I always say she was the main character in The Widest Net because I worked with her for a long time as she was going through and growing her business. She did a very detailed, specific codification that I worked with her on over a year for her Surefire strategy, which is a specific approach to the way that she builds her brand strategies for her clients. And you can see through these details, each of the different areas in which she does her work. Each of those different sections has very detailed, instructions. And she specifically built this. She leveraged a grant. She was awarded a $100,000 grant from the Canadian government to be going through this process of codification. And so she really put that effort and energy into doing that. And now she's really well positioned to be licensing her methodology to other marketing agencies, as well as licensing and partnering with certification with organizations that are working with clients to be building business development strategies. So for example, in Canada, there are a lot of nonprofits that can be supporting small businesses, and her methodology can be installed in those systems where people are certified as trained in the train the trainer program to be delivering her methodology and then using all the tools from her method. So you can just imagine as you start to see when you're doing this combination of codification, that is an investment of time and energy, but then when you start to leverage it looking at partners, is where you can really begin to see the potential growth. Because once the system is built, and then you develop the systems for marketing and sales, that's where you can, we always say it can be a little bit of a longer sales cycle to be making those inroads, but then once you make those sales, they can really be much higher dollar in bigger checks. Because when you have the combination, for those of you interested maybe in certification and licensing, you can have people who might be trained to be delivering your specific methodology, and then the licensing agreement is what it is that they can use when they could be using your tools, for example, with X number of end users. So let's say ultimately they're going to touch, 2,000 end users with your methods. Your licensing agreement would put a dollar amount for each of those users. And that's really where you start to see some of the bigger contracts and the benefits of licensing. All right, so that's about it, I think, for kind of giving the overview. This is us, my business partner, Darren Padilla, Josiah Owens, who's one of our main instructional designers, and then we have other folks that are on our team. But let's hear kind of what are people thinking about? Are there any like live, are there any live examples that we can work? Do you have ideas that you want to brainstorm? I'm a coach, so I'm like,
We did get a comment from Jen saying, "Thank you so much for this presentation. I think we all have hidden
oh yeah.
secret sauce, strengths that go unnoticed or assumed. I'm curious what your process is to unearth
Mhm.
areas of business that are worth focusing on."
Yeah. Um, and thanks. I realize I flashed my contact information very quickly on there. Yeah. So the process to unearth what could be the areas that are the of greatest value that could potentially become more productized services are usually to go through like a discovery process in the case that it's a client or an agency, where we would really look at first the core of your business. So understanding, who are your clients, what are the core services that you provide, and then going through and figuring out what is your overall strategy first. So is it more that you're going to change the way that you're delivering directly to clients, where you would have maybe a bit more of a codified structured productized service just to make things more efficient? Or are there other new audiences that you want to go after? And so the first part of the process is usually, sometimes I do it in, a series of virtual calls. Other times we do it in like an all day strategy session where we'll meet in person and really dig into looking at your business, where are the areas that you feel really make the most sense? What is the vision that you have for the way in which you actually want to be designing and developing those more productized services, and then creating a plan to doing testing early. I personally am a fan of testing first. We can all probably have the idea that there's huge potential in something. And I highly recommend, before you put all of your effort and energy into building all of it or into hiring somebody else to help you build it, that you first make sure there's water in the pool before you jump. And so see if you can sell it. Maybe, sometimes we'll frame an overall like offering to be putting in front of a client, knowing that if they choose to purchase it, that there is a specific path in order to build it and deliver it to them. I get involved in a lot of early stage conversations with clients that might have one of their corporate clients who's asking for like a train the trainer, a licensing and certification program. So I'll often work with them in order to be introducing the idea, to be sealing a deal where we can be clear. Like I'll often share the slide that I shared earlier so we could let the client know what the end deliverables are, but we won't build that program until we make sure that the deal is inked. So that's just a little cautionary tale, I would say, is just make sure that there's actually a market there, because it is a lot of work. Um,
Uh, the next question is, does your team help name and structure the codified service?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways we teach a class. We have a cohort based class called Productize Your Service Business that we do a couple times a year. We just finished one cohort. We have the next one coming up in November. I'll try to find it and throw it in chat quickly before the end of this. If not, Shadley, you can follow up and link to that. But that's if you want to learn more in the kind of in a cohort base basis. If not, we definitely do work with individual clients, just more as a finite engagement. So just hit me up, Pam at Pamela Slim, if you want to talk more about it.
Awesome. I have a question, I guess. I would think that a lot of, potentially a lot of the people that are here today, it's two-sided. There's a what can we do internally to potentially create a revenue stream for our agency? But
Yeah,
then what if we see with a client something that maybe they could, that we could partner with them to help them figure out a revenue stream? How do you start talking about it with if it's not something you're known to do, like this is obviously something you do, but you see an opportunity for a client to perhaps be able to do some of this. How do you
yeah.
start that conversation in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming to them, especially if you're not 100% sure of all the terminology and all of it yourself? Like, what is a good way to start that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, so I think on one hand, it is beginning to get just more familiar with the process yourself. So if you are more approaching that in your business where you have that productized service, yeah, because if you're in the business of helping people to market and sell their services and products, that sometimes you're going to be seeing things, opportunities that you can talk about. So I like to think of as a way to be streamlining the operations about that. First, to think of specific questions that you could ask. You could leverage some of the things that we talked about here today, where you might be asking them questions like, is there something that your clients are constantly asking for? Is there part of what you're offering that you just feel like everybody gets really excited when they see it? Or as you think about your strategy or go to market strategies or anything you notice that your competitors are not doing that you've always thought about. So there could be a way that you could be preparing those kinds of conversations. The other thing is often phoning a friend. I always like to be available as a resource, so it's just part of how I spend my time, where you are in that process and you just want to have, I'm not the only person, right, who does this work. If you find that that is a direction that you want to go, of helping your clients not only market and sell what they have, but also look for untapped areas, then it would be developing a relationship maybe with somebody who does more the kind of work that we do. So it's not uncommon where I can join the call of a partner who might be talking to one of their clients to be describing a little bit more of the process. And then I'm really all about like collaborative partnerships. So sometimes then, it would be where I could come in and be providing some support from our agency for what the marketing agency is doing. I think the only caution I would just say is not really caution, but it does speak to how it is that you view that core purpose of what it is that you're doing. So there
Right.
could be those that get excited about not only marketing but also people to develop a really specific way in which they could be developing offers. I feel like marketing folks are uniquely suited to that because you all live in the world of market fit. So it's more educating yourself about the method and the model components that I think would be
Right.
really helpful.
And what about if you are trying to figure out, maybe you don't currently have a system, maybe you're currently using another system and you want to figure out how to reposition it through your own branding in a way that it feels like obviously something new, so that you're not just putting your name on a system that already works for someone else. How do you start brainstorming how to create the
Mhm.
system or the IP, or if you don't currently have one that's obvious, you're like, oh, this is a really, like if you're here today, you're like, this is really interesting. I don't think that we currently have anything.
Mhm.
Maybe we could inch forward or we could position this a little bit if in order to start the process of building towards this. Um,
Yeah.
does
I,
that
I think
make sense?
I think it's my version of probably what you get from your book clients, which is like, do I really have anything unique to say? You know, how many books have been written on marketing? You know, like that can be a common thing. I think the same thing is true for methods that we can look at. Story brand's a good example, right? The hero's journey, it's definitely architected off the hero's journey as part of how you see where that methodology was inspired. Or Nancy Duarte, who's a dear friend of mine. Some of you might know her work at Duarte, the Silicon Valley agency. She talks a lot about the, utilizing some of the hero's journey and the methodology. It is normal and it is prudent to be looking at things that have worked. So there can be core elements to what you might look at, key framework, key elements that you might have to how it is that people are marketing their business or coming up with their brand. The differentiator that you're looking at is, do you have a specific point of view in, I call it often the what's missing component. So you can say, gosh, there's a bunch of people out there that are actually doing really fantastic work in marketing. It's amazing. What I find is missing is they're not leveraging the power of AI. Or what's missing is they're not building a strategy that takes into consideration the unique desires of the business owner, in addition to what makes money. Whatever the thing is, they're not paying attention to profit levels. So they're doing things, to make money, but maybe not to be as profitable. So this is the way, thanks, Colleen. I know you have to jump. Thanks for showing up. But this is the way that you can start to look at some of the specific components of what you do that really add value, because it does go to the heart of um, you creating and contributing something that really is going to be making a difference. Where I'm not a fan of just, creating a method because everybody says you should have one, or writing a book because one should have a book in order to get business. It's too much work to do if you don't really feel like you're adding value to what it is that you're creating. So that's the part to me that's it's probably a mixture of art and science, where you really are noticing the kinds of things that are just continually tripping people up and bothering them. One of the positioning frames that I use for the widest net, my last book, is I would position my approach to how it is that you strategically think about building your business from the lens of ecosystem versus empire. So what was bothering me is a lot of the positioning and marketing strategies were built on you building an empire and focusing everything around you, showing how you are the only unique expert out there who is the best in the world at something. You can be the best at what you do, but my experience was my clients need a whole bunch of people in addition to me. And I would rather build my business based on complementary partnerships rather than trying to put forth that idea that I'm the only one who could solve problems. So I think those are the ways that you can start to look for what's unique. And I think that grappling is a really healthy thing, that even if you don't decide to do any productized services or any, licensing or scaling, you need to be thinking about that anyway, just to be differentiating yourself in the market.
Right, right. Awesome. Does anybody else have anything they want to jump in with? Any
Heather,
questions, ideas, comments? Because I can keep talking. Pam and I are friends, and we start brainstorming, and you'll all get lost. Um, so I'm thinking more about if I have any last minute questions. I will say, as we're preparing to wrap up and people are heading out, this will be on the AMI website in the next week or so.
mhm.
And the worksheets that or the presentation that Pam shared will also be part of that that can be downloaded once it goes live. It will be on the AMI website. So we
That
will
sounds really
watch
good.
for that if you are looking for the um, actual worksheets and
I
things.
love it. I forgot, can I do a little show and tell for a second? I forgot I was going to share a inside agency example. So for those of you that are interested in codifying, more the process to doing work, we just had Brittany on my team who's really great with Notion. We just redid the way we have our like client kickoff and intake form. We found there's a bunch of emails back and forth. We'd have a lot of information in the ebook. I'm sorry, in emails. And so she created more of a process where there was like a handbook for clients for their kickoff. So when we're doing certification work, there's background details of what to expect from the project next steps. There's links like to their client portal, links to the Google Drive where they'd put documents, background about us, about the team, contact information, timeline expectations, and then people can start to put in their contact information right here in the portal. And then we have our intake form that's right from there. So that's just, sorry, I didn't remember last time to use it, but that's an example to me of how we've really tried to structure use some of these concepts to the way that we actually do work.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
I think that's, unless anyone else has any last minute notes, I think we're going to wrap it up.
sounds
This was fantastic. Thank you very much, Pam. Again, this will be up on the website in the next week or so, and included in that will be the all the presentation pages. 2 weeks from today, we'll be doing another webinar. That one is on keeping your website clean of typos and programs and systems that exist to help with that process. So that will be in a couple weeks. And until then, thank you everybody for joining us today. And thank you, Pam. It's always fantastic to hang out with you for a bit.
good to see you too. Thanks, everyone. It's great to meet you. Hope it was helpful.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.